Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit. That ought to pop up there in the next slide, maybe. But with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. This is our short sermon this morning. And we had a short sermon last week out of Philippians 2, 1 and 2. Only 2 verses again this morning. Next week will be Easter. We'll talk about the Christ hymn, verses 5 through 11. So if you are studying for next week, or you have friends, relatives, family that will be around, you'll know what the lesson is. And that Christ hymn is that famous passage where Jesus did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but He humbled Himself, emptied Himself, was made in the form of a man, and died upon a cross, and was raised and exalted. So that's next week's lesson. But a precursor to that is simply here, do nothing from selfishness. If you're not careful, you'll read that rather rapidly, and you won't realize that you just named every sin you know. That every sin you know is in that phrase. Selfishness. I was just going to go gamble a little. No, what I was going to do was selfishly put at risk what God had blessed me with, that I could bless my family with, or those in need with. Wait a minute, adultery's not selfish. Adultery's the sin. It's going to be the outworking. Adultery's about doing what you want to do. About making choices against covenants that you've made. It's selfishness. Jealousy and selfish ambition that Byron and Cade led us into this morning. It's just Satan trying to take what's true and twist it. Beautiful fruit. God says, oh, don't eat it. Eat all the other fruit, don't eat that one. Selfishly, I want to be like God. It's there, and I can have it. We do selfishly what we want to do. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit. Vainglory was the old King James, right? Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit. We'll talk about that in a moment. Actually, we'll let Jesus talk about it. But with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. In front of your bulletin, Lisa made a nice front. It says, who are you interested in? Who are you interested in? Quite frankly, most of us are most interested in ourselves. We're most impacted by our self. Entire philosophies are built on the id and the ego, and proving that everything in the world is driven by selfishness. And Jesus is the counter to all of that, and He asks us to, with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Who are you interested in this morning? In Luke chapter 14, we find the wedding feast. We let Jesus give us 2 pointed parables to speak to our text and to close out the sermon this morning. The first is in Luke 14, verse 7 through 11. He began speaking this parable to the invited guests when He noticed how they were picking out the places of honor at the table, saying to them, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor for someone more distinguished than you. Wait a minute. That's the phrase we have the most trouble with, right? Who could be more distinguished than me? Someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by him. He who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this man, and then in disgrace you proceed to occupy the last place. But when you're invited, go and recline at the last place, so that when the one who has invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. He who humbles himself will be exalted. Empty conceit. That's that word I told you we talk about. That's the guy that shows up at the wedding feast. His empty conceit is, well, surely I'm supposed to be at the head table. Surely I'm supposed to be up front on the days, and people need to see me and know that I'm there. One of the hardest things that you can do is walk into a room and assume that everyone in the room is more important than you are. Well, that's going to create a lot of low self-esteem, isn't it? I don't think so. Because you're important to God. But if we walk into every environment we're in and assume that everyone there is more important than us, everyone at the doctor's is sicker than you. Everyone needs what you want most, to be at the front of the line, to be head. What if you presume that? Everybody needs that. They want that. They need that. We try to be that encouragement. One of the hardest things is our presupposition of glory, vainglory, empty conceit. He says, no, I just want you to think a little differently. I don't want you to devalue yourself. I want you to value everyone else. I want you to highly elevate them. All of us have been there, right? Two people approaching the door, you're only 5 or 6 feet apart. It's that uncomfortable distance. 8 or 10 feet, there's no question. Don't look back. Don't touch the door. Just go on in. 5 or 6 feet, you've got to decide, wait a minute, do I hold the door? Do I don't hold the door? It's even harder, guys, now than it used to be. Now there's a woman behind you. Used to, automatic, hold the door. You have to be a little careful. Sometimes that's offensive. What if I'm here and hold the door and offend someone? I've got to look out for their own interest. There could be a time when you actually don't hold the door. You walk through for their good. But most of us, male, female, we don't care. We're holding the door. Come right in. Wait a minute. We got out of church 30 seconds ahead of you, and we made it to the restaurant 30 seconds ahead of you. And if you think we're losing our advantage of 30 seconds over you, well, hold the door. Don't look out for your own personal interest, but also for the interest of others. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility regard one another as more important than yourself. Doesn't Jesus tell a wonderful parable? Have you ever been sat down? I'm sorry, those seats are reserved. I go to the Rangers game. I've got a ticket with a seat number on it. I go find my seat. Right? Now, I'm pretty comfortable. If I get to my seat and someone else is in it, I'll just sort of sit near there. But I want my authorization, right? That if some usher comes up and says, show me your ticket stub, do you belong where you are? I want to be able to say, no, they're in my seat, but it's okay, I'm over here. But I don't usually go hunt a better seat and hope no one comes to kick me out. Do you? Maybe you can do that. And I suppose that's not ungodly. When we get in the stands and we get there and these were just, I wonder if maybe no one bought these tickets. This would be a great place to sit. We just sit down until someone shows up, sort of looks over our shoulder, and the usher comes down and says, are you in the right seat? Well, what does mine say? Oh, no, you're supposed to be, oh, okay, I'll move over there. We have been humbled. Jesus does it to us again in Luke chapter 10. Got a guy doing great in his religion. He loves the Lord his God with all his heart, soul, strength, and mind. Loves his neighbor as himself. He's answered Jesus correctly. You know the story. Chapter 10, verse 29 is where the mistake comes. But wishing to justify himself. Luke chapter 10, verse 29. Wishing to justify himself, this lawyer said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" I can tell you in about 3 minutes he's going to wish he was somewhere else. He's on the Southwest getaway. Anywhere else. Let me be somewhere else. Jesus replied to him, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. By chance, a priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side." Your backdrop is the front of your bulletin. Who are you interested in? Verse 33, "But a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion." That's our splagna from all the last month. He felt compassion from his innards. He sees a man. He feels compassion for him. He's not only looking out for his own interest, he's looking out for the interest of others. With humility of mind, he is regarding someone else as more important than he is. Priest shows up. He does not regard a beaten down, robbed man as more important than him. Doesn't even really see it. He notices. All right? He is the guy who wants to be even with the accident, so he can't be a good witness and doesn't feel too bad if he doesn't stop. Right? That's who he wants to be. The Levite comes along and he's in that same condition. But a Samaritan. Jesus really gets in their heads and says, "I want to tell you that the one you don't expect, the one you all look down on, the one you assume you're better than, those Samaritans, those crossbred people that live between Galilee and Judea, those Samaritans, that guy knows who his neighbor is. That guy knows who he's going to serve. That guy knows where he's going to sit in relationship to this beaten down man." He felt compassion. 34, "He came to him, bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them, and he put him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I'll repay you.' Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands?" He said, "The one who showed mercy toward him." Then Jesus said to him, "Go and do the same." Paul writes to us and says, "Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourself." That's your job. Regard others as more important than yourself. Some of you can't even look on the same aisle and assume that, wait a minute, your sister's more important than you? Hello, Logan, what do you do with that? My sister's more important than I am. That's what God tells me. What happens in my family if suddenly I regard all my siblings as more important than I am? You can't have sibling rivalry if you won't rival with them. Say that again. You can't have sibling rivalry if you won't rival with them. Yes, I assume you are more important than me. Mom loves you best. Everyone knows that. No, what if we make those conditions and we change our feeling? He has everything to teach us. Do not merely look out for your own personal interest, but also for the interest of others. Here's your take home this morning. Who's number 1? It's not you. That's our fan chant, right? Who's number one? Got to be me. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and He will lift you up. That's the song you sang. We're about to fall down on bended knee. Oh Lord, make us humble. We bow our hearts. Oh God of Jacob is the song you're about to sing. Who's number one? Jesus and everyone else. Jesus and everyone else. Jesus reminds us that someone is more important. This week, Jesus hangs on a cross and says, someone is more important than my will. Someone is more valuable than my life. You know who it was? It was you. Jesus sat on the pew with you and looked down and said, you're more important than I am. You're more valuable. I'm going to submit to the will of my Father and see how that works out. God's will for you is that you not be selfish, that you don't have empty conceit, that you lower your mind and assume that you can lift everyone else up. Notice, that isn't putting yourself down. Humility is to put yourself under everyone else, with the outcome being that everyone else is lifted up. In church, we call that edify one another. Everyone else is lifted up because you've placed yourself under them by choices that you've made. And you don't regard anyone else as less important. Everyone else is more important. You're not merely looking out for your own personal interest, but also for the interest of others. When you go to the wedding, watch where you sit. When you see someone in need, watch what your attitude is. Mainly, be sure that you hear the words of Paul and think with a heart of God about how you can serve someone else. Jesus shows us how. Next week, we'll explore that to its limit. This week, I ask you to humble yourself in the sight of the Lord. I ask you to fall on your knees and ask God to make you humble. So I'm asking all of you to respond to this morning's sermon. I'm not literally talking about falling on your knees. If you choose to, it's fine. I am talking about in heart being humbled before God. If you need to do that publicly, we invite you to come. There'll be elders and their wives stationed here and around the building. You can humble yourself before them. It may be that you need to do that privately at home. It may be that you just need each of us to live in a family where we treat one another as more important than ourselves. May that be true at your house. May it be true at our house. It is true in God's house. Together we stand and say,